The air turned to glass, then crystallized into razors. It was the 22nd of December 1889, just after sunset on the high plains of Montana. A strange, choking silence fell, like the calm before a dark destiny. Then came the wind, a solid wall of force that screamed instead of just howling. Just an hour earlier, the temperature had been a moderate -1 degree Celsius, but it was now plummeting below -18 degrees Celsius. This, however, marked the beginning of what would become known as the Great Freeze. Ada Thornton, sheltered on the northern slope of Miller's Ridge, felt only the gentle heat radiating from her cast-iron stove. She made a cup of tea, watching the water flow easily from a simple brass tap, a genuine wonder. In a world rapidly turning to solid ice, the wind sounded like a distant, muffled wail. It was dampened by a 3-meter blanket of insulating snow and 60 centimeters of turf in the adjacent stable, separated by a thick stone wall. Her bay horse, Copper, happily chewed his oats, while his water trough gave off a faint steam under the glow of the outdoor lantern. The prosperous settlement was dying. Ada, meanwhile, enjoyed her tea inside, listening to the quiet hum of ongoing life. The previous spring had been lively, full of melting snow and promise. 6 months earlier, Ada Thornton had stood on this same piece of unwanted land, not as a survivor but as a petitioner. A widow whose idea was dismissed as grief-fueled fantasy, she faced Mayor Hutchins in the dusty land office. His large belly preceded him into every room, and his opinions were as immovable as the far-off mountains. "You want to buy the north slope of Miller's Ridge?" he wheezed, adjusting his spectacles to study the map. "Then, ma'am, with all due respect to your late husband, that particular parcel is the least valuable in the whole county. The sun doesn't reach it for half the year. Snow piles up to a depth of 6 meters. Nothing grows there." Ada placed a hand on the map, her finger tracing its contours. "That's precisely why I want it, Mayor. My late husband Robert was a hydrologist for the Northern Pacific. He carefully mapped this entire area. He kept meticulous records." She paused, her voice steady. "He documented a small geothermal spring located high on that slope. It stays at a constant 10 degrees Celsius all year. He also mapped the wind patterns. The prevailing westerly winds cause huge snowdrifts on that specific leeward slope. Snow is one of the best natural insulators, and a 3-meter layer provides as much insulation as nearly 2 meters of wood." Hutchins briefly shut his eyes. "Insulating against what?" "We build houses from wood and brick to keep out the cold." "You fight the cold," Ada said gently. "I intend to use it. I will build a home dug into the hillside, using the ground for 3 walls. The front will be stone and timber with a sod roof. The winter snow will completely bury it under that insulating layer. Combined with the earth's natural heat and a small stove, the inside temperature will remain stable. Water from the hot spring will be directed directly into the house. I'll have running water, even when all wells and pumps in the valley are frozen solid." The mayor leaned back with a smirk, observing a grieving woman absorbed in cryptic writings from a dead man's notebook. "A house hidden under snow, featuring its own thermal spring. Madam, this is Montana, not a novel. We build solid houses here, buildings that stretch proudly skyward, but pride won't keep you warm at -40 degrees Celsius." Her patience wearing thin, she replied. "Mayor, Robert's calculations were always accurate. He called it thermal banking. This method captures the ground's retained summer warmth and the snow's insulating ability." Hutchins sighed dismissively, seeing it as merely a $20 deal. "You can have the land for the assessed price of $20, but don't come to me for help when you get stuck in a mess of your own doing." He stamped his seal on the deed. With a dramatic flourish, "Goodbye, Mrs. Thornton." News of the widow's project swept through the town like a blaze across the prairie. It soon became the town's favorite joke. Thomas Brennan, the area's top builder, led the conversations at the local bar. "She's digging underground like a badger. It took humanity 1,000 years to leave the caves, and now she wants to go back." The Appalachians survived. Her home was called the Snow Grave. Ada herself gained the name Ice Widow, a cruel title that mixed her recent widowhood with her strange new project. The main critic was Jeremiah Webb, a wealthy cattle rancher. To display his wealth, he had a luxurious new house built on the valley floor. This impressive two-story Victorian was shipped by train from Chicago. It had huge windows, ornate gingerbread trim, and a grand porch. The cost was an incredible $3,500. To anyone who would listen, Webb would declare, while pointing at his mansion, $3,500 for progress. That's what it costs to tame this country. In the meantime, the poor ice widow was spending very little to bury herself. "This is a step backward, not forward," said Dr. Harrison, the town doctor, stroking his beard thoughtfully before declaring her plan unsanitary. "Living underground promotes dampness, sickness, and depression. The human mind needs sunlight and fresh air, not burial like a vegetable." Trusting both their doctor and their wealthiest citizen, the townspeople agreed, thinking Mrs. Thornton had clearly gone mad. Ada ignored them. Having obtained the $20 land deed, she began her project. Her first and only partner was copper. With her strong bay gelding, she bought a pulley system, several sticks of dynamite for $20, and a sturdy sled for moving rocks. The initial excavation was extremely difficult, using small, precisely placed explosive charges, a method she learned by watching railroad builders. She broke up the rocky hillside. Then, day after day, she and Copper hauled many tons of rock and dirt from the slope. She dug out a cavity about 6 meters wide and 9 meters deep. She paid a local person $10 to help cut and place the main timber beams. These were 3 0-centimeter thick pine logs, which she treated with creosote to prevent rot. This cost $30. She lined the interior walls with fieldstone, which she painstakingly carried and set in cement on her own. The building's exterior included a large stone wall with a single small window having 2 panes of glass. A solid oak door and a necessary but expensive luxury costing $8 were also elements of the facade. However, the water supply was the most crucial element, and she found the spring exactly as Robert's diary described. A thin trickle of warm water flowed from a crack in the rock. She spent an extra $50 on iron pipes and the required installation gear. She dug a trench about 0.9 meters deep to create a gravity-fed water line from the spring straight to her house. She made certain the pipe was buried sufficiently deep so the ground's heat would prevent it from freezing. The roof, a remarkable example of frontier engineering, was a tribute to her resourcefulness. Strong wooden beams held up an oiled canvas layer to repel water. The roof was then covered with 0.6 meters of prairie sod, carefully cut into identical bricks, weighing around 23 kilograms each. Over 2 weeks, she and Copper, using a ramp and sled, succeeded in hoisting hundreds of these bricks onto the roof. The sod layers would eventually mesh together. Next, she constructed a stable for Copper next to the cabin. She also dug into the hillside, creating a shared wall to take advantage of the cabin's interior warmth. The building work was completed by the end of August, after 3 months of continuous labor. The entire endeavor, including the land, cost a total of $145. That amount was only a tiny portion of the cost of the cheapest wooden house in town. It was less than 4% of what Jeremiah Webb spent on his grand Victorian home. Please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Whether you live in the mountains, wide open plains, or somewhere the wind howls just as fiercely, the lessons learned from life on the frontier remain timelessly important. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so you'll know what happens when winter finally arrives. When the snow grave appeared, what began as the town's amusement turned into scornful contempt. In the saloon, bets were placed on exactly when the roof would collapse. They guessed it wouldn't survive the first big snow and that she would be found frozen solid. By Christmas, many thought it wouldn't withstand the first major snowfall. They expected she'd be discovered frozen. By Christmas, Ada was completely shunned by society. She no longer received invites to community events or picnics. Every time she went to the general store for supplies, conversations would suddenly halt. Furthermore, women who had once offered condolences for her husband's death now gave her cold stares. They saw her not just as strange, but as a direct threat to social conventions. Her behavior was seen as an insult to her deceased husband's memory, a man they assumed would be horrified. As a result, a new phrase entered the local vocabulary. To pull a Thornton meant doing something needlessly complicated, when a simpler, traditional method was available. For example, when a farmer tried to dig an unusual irrigation channel, his work failed. His neighbors sneered, "Trying to pull a Thornton, were you?" She bore all of this with a quiet grace, which only infuriated her critics more. She had her husband's detailed journals, his exact calculations, and a firm faith in the laws of nature, laws that care nothing for public opinion. She didn't build to gain their approval. She built for the world as it truly was, not as others wished it to be. Ada and Copper moved into their hillside home at the start of September. The early benefits became apparent as a late summer heat wave blazed through the valley, turning the typical houses of prosperity into stifling ovens. Inside her underground cabin, the temperature stayed steadily below 18 degrees Celsius. Thanks to the thick earthen walls and turf roof, the cool night air was preserved, turning the cabin into a natural root cellar all autumn long. She spent her time restocking her pantry and gathering a reasonable supply of firewood. Her firewood stock was far smaller than what her neighbors needed. She also enjoyed the quiet solitude, gazing at the valley spread out below her through her sole window, where the town's lights twinkled after nightfall. The distance seemed vast. There was no resentment. Rather, a profound peace and preparedness enveloped her. Under the glow of a kerosene lamp, Robert's diaries provided his calming presence in the quiet. He had foreseen every eventuality. People would call it madness. He had observed that it was easier to mock the unfamiliar than to question one's own convictions. The first light snow of November dusted the valley. Her sod roof functioned perfectly. Yet the townsfolk remained doubtful, and Jeremiah Webb watched from his porch. He chuckled as the first flakes fell, saying, "Let's see how the ice widow enjoys her grave now." Inside, Ada lit her small stove. For the first time, she noticed the barometric pressure, which she tracked with a device Robert had given her, begin a slow, then sharp drop. This drop was more severe and faster than any she had recorded before. The birds disappeared, and the usual calls of chickadees and jays fell silent. Even the hardy magpies had left one afternoon. She observed a herd of deer urgently moving down from the highlands into the safest, thickly forested parts of the river bottom. Their journey was not just migration, it was a flight. She knew that animals have no pride or ideas of progress. Instinct drives them. She finished her final checks, ensuring the seals on her door and window were tight. The leftover firewood was carried in and piled next to the stove. This small pile would have seemed paltry to any other homesteader. She made sure the path to Copper's stall was clear, even though it was inside the same structure. She thought about riding into town, waving Robert's diagrams and yelling a warning, but knew it was pointless. They would merely give her a condescending, a pat on the back, call her hysterical, and tell her to go back to her underground home. Their doubt created a wall more formidable than her little shack. So she concentrated on saving the only life she could ensure, hers. The phenomenon began on 22 December at 1651. The sky, which had kept a strange yellowish-gray color all day, turned to a deep bruised purple. The wind stopped completely, creating a silent emptiness more terrifying than any storm. Through her window, Ada watched the first white wisps topping the western ridge, looking more like a flood than a cloud. The temperature dropped by 28 degrees Celsius in less than 30 minutes. The air itself seemed to crack and freeze. Then the wind hit a relentless force, a 96 kilometers per hour blizzard. It brought not soft snowflakes but a fine, blinding ice powder that ripped paint off wood and flesh off bone. Visibility shrank to an arm's length, then disappeared entirely. The Great Freeze was a storm that would be remembered for its deadly power. The snow wasn't simply falling. It was driven horizontally, packing into every crack and crevice with a density similar to concrete. This storm appeared designed to reveal and ruthlessly exploit all flaws in human constructions. Amid prosperity, chaos emerged. The first thing to give way were the windows. Jeremiah Webb's these visually appealing single-pane windows, designed for vistas rather than strength, quickly froze over and then collapsed under the pressure and severe cold. The Arctic winds surged into his home as though the walls had vanished, forcing his family to huddle together, wrapped in every blanket they had. As the storm ravaged their grand, expensive house, the chimneys built poorly for such strong updrafts began to fail in the freezing conditions. Supercooled air rushing down the flues extinguished the fires, filling rooms with choking smoke, followed by a torrent of Arctic air. The roofs, not ready for the abrupt heavy load of snow, began to groan and split. Yet the worst failure was with the water system. The town's new water tower, a symbol of its advancement, froze solid as the ice expanded. With a screech, it ripped apart the tower's iron joints, the sound swallowed by the storm across the town. All pump handles were frozen stiff, and even the shallow wells were frozen entirely. The inhabitants were trapped in icy homes, deprived of heat and, worse, water. Desperately trying to stay warm, their bodies quickly used up internal fluids, with no way to replenish them. Meanwhile, in her snow-buried shelter, Ada Thornton added a single log to her small stove. Her home stayed at a steady 20 degrees Celsius, and the same blizzard that was destroying the town was ironically keeping her alive. The wind kept piling snow against the north slope of the hill, gradually burying her cabin. Under a perfect insulating blanket, the storm's angry howling turned into a distant, muffled hum. When she got thirsty, she just turned the brass tap. The water, heated by geothermal energy and protected by a meter of soil, ran freely as if it were a warm summer day. She felt cozy and safe with running water available. She fed Copper, then checked his water trough, which also got its supply from the hot spring. She was ready to wait it out, not feeling smug at all. She felt great sorrow, picturing the terror in the valley as the storm went into its second day. Then a sound broke the quiet, desperate, frenzied knocking at her door. When Ada opened the door, she saw a horrifying sight. Thomas Brennan, the village builder, stood there. His face was hidden behind a layer of frozen blood and ice, and his hands were cracked and bleeding. He cradled his little daughter, wrapped in a thin, ice-crusted blanket, and said hoarsely, "Please, help us. For the love of God, help us," his voice faltering. "Our roof collapsed. The cold is excruciating, and we have no water." Ada didn't mention his previous mockery or the bets. She simply opened the door wider and said, "Come inside and bring her close to the fire." Brennan stumbled in, his eyes growing wide with amazement at the calm, radiant warmth. He stared at the steaming kettle on the stove. The dripping tap appeared to him as a mirage. Ada carefully took the child, wrapped her in dry, warm wool, and gave her a small cup of hot water. Brennan was just the first to come. Within an hour, another group arrived, led by Dr. Harrison. The respected physician who had earlier warned about the unhygienic state of her home now saw it as a safe haven. "Mrs. Thornton," he began, his voice trembling. "We can talk about this later, doctor," she responded, firm but kind. "Bring your friends inside." During that entire day and into the next, a mournful line of people made their way up the hill. They arrived in small clusters, families clinging tightly to each other. Their former modern pride had been entirely stripped away, leaving only a desperate need for shelter. Jeremiah Webb was the last to reach her doorstep. His once splendid Victorian home had transformed into a desolate ice palace, and his wife suffered from severe frostbite. He came to Ada's door, the valley's most important man, utterly humbled. When their eyes met, his gaze showed not pride but a shame so profound it was tangible. No words were spoken. Ada simply nodded. "There is still plenty of room, Mr. Webb. If this story appeals to you, consider subscribing to Wild West Retribution every week. We offer tales of frontier wisdom and fairness." Back to our story. In under 2 days, Ada Thornton's dwelling of roughly 56 square meters had become a refuge for 27 people. Though crowded, the space hummed with activity, and Ada, staying composed, naturally took command. Undoubtedly, she brought order to the group by carefully apportioning the limited space. The most vulnerable children and the sick were given the warmest spots. Near the stove, water from her seemingly miraculous tap was shared, along with her modest stock of potatoes. Flour and preserved meat, painstakingly divided, became a communal supply. These supplies were cooked into thin but essential soups. No one mentioned the past. Phrases like ice widow or snow grave were never uttered. They were simply people who had survived. Their very survival depended on the woman's careful management. They had once mocked Thomas Brennan. The construction expert gazed upward at the ceiling's interlocked wooden beams, His former professional arrogance had given way to the wonder of a student. Dr. Harrison helped care for the frostbite victims, using the clean, warm water he once considered impure. Jeremiah Webb, the powerful rancher, discreetly helped distribute supplies. His hands, usually steady on reins and money, now trembled as he handed a cup of broth to a child. From the community, they huddled together, forming a small haven of warmth and life in an icy world. Their rescue came from a plan born from a dead man's diary and a widow's determination. The harsh cold spell lasted for 4 days. By daybreak of the 5th day, the wind's fury had finally subsided. The resulting silence was deep and unsettling. When Ada forced open her door, she had to dig through a snowdrift nearly 1.8 meters high, blocking the entrance. The world they stepped into was completely transformed, revealing a landscape of pure, blinding, deadly white. Sunlight illuminated a valley entirely encased in ice and snow. Of Prosperity's 37 buildings, more than half were destroyed or irreparably damaged, with collapsed ceilings and crumbled walls. Jeremiah Webb's luxurious $30,500 home lay in ruins, and a thick, ugly layer of ice covered its ornamental features. Inside, it presented a frozen scene of destruction. The human cost was even more heartbreaking. In the end, 16 people were confirmed dead. They had frozen in their sleep, died from lack of water, or been exposed without shelter when the storm struck. A storm that only one woman had prepared for took the lives of 16 people. At the entrance of the shelter, the survivors looked out at their ruined town. They understood that their survival came not from luck, but from the very structure they had all mocked. A week later, the remaining residents met in the only building that had mostly survived the storm. The general store's roof held strong, though its windows were missing, covered with boards to keep out the cold. This gathering mixed grief with gratitude, and a weary Mayor Hutchins climbed onto a wooden crate to speak. But the words would not come. He simply shook his head and stepped down. Then Jeremiah Webb moved to the front. His eyes skipped over the crowd and settled on Ada Thornton, standing quietly in the back. "I called your home a foolish project," Webb began, his voice clear and carrying in the cold air. "A grave error," I said proudly. "My house and money stood for progress. I was wrong, completely wrong." He took a deep breath. "We built our houses with pride, designing them for fair weather and gentle breezes, and we built for a perfect world. You, however, built for what is real. We fought against nature. Nature defeated us. You respected it, and it gave you safety. I called you foolish, yet you were the only sensible one among us. You saved 27 of us, including my wife and myself." His eyes moved, full of pleading. "I was wrong. God help me, Ada. You proved right today. Will you teach us and show us how to construct things your way? For we have nothing left but the knowledge you tried to give." From different parts of the room, more voices joined in agreement. "She was right. We were utterly wrong." The builder Thomas Brennan stepped forward, ma'am, and said, "I am a builder who knows nothing. I ask to be your first student." Ada looked at the faces before her. The doctor, the builder, the cattleman, the town's leader. She saw no trace of their earlier mockery, only humility and hope. "We never wanted to be proven right in this way." She spoke softly, her voice heavy with grief for the 16 who had died. "That does not matter now. You are safe. And that is what really matters. Of course, I will teach you, and we will rebuild together." The next spring brought not a feeling of possibility, but one of determination. Ada Thornton. The once ridiculed widow became the town's most valuable person, using her late husband's journals as teaching materials. She used her own house as a model and began to share her knowledge. It was an extraordinary sight. Jeremiah Webb, the cattle king, funded the entire rebuilding project. His money was now used not for show but for endurance. He bought tools, timber, and pipes for everyone willing to learn. Thomas Brennan, once the town's top builder, became Ada's most devoted pupil. He drafted her plans and managed the work crews with the zeal of a new convert. They did not just rebuild, they reshaped their whole town according to Ada's principles. Over 10 years, new underground homes were dug into the slopes of the nearby hills. During that first year, each one was an adaptation of her design, customized to the specific landscape. This building method became known as Thornton construction. The informal saying "pulling a Thornton" saw a comeback. It no longer meant behaving recklessly. Instead, it came to mean using remarkable foresight and intelligence to solve a problem for the town of Prosperity. Formed during the harsh challenges of the Great Freeze was the building of a future based not on pride, but on long-lasting stability. Ada Thornton lived another 40 years. She never remarried but was never alone. She became the most prominent woman in town, the keeper of its shared wisdom. She watched the community she had saved grow and thrive. Its unique sod houses became a model for settlers across the High Plains. Her knowledge, initially dismissed as a widow's fancy, turned into a core principle. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1929. She was 78 years old, content in the hillside home she had built herself. Nearly the whole county attended her funeral. She was laid to rest in the town cemetery, yet everyone knew that her true monument was the town itself, a living testament to her calm, unwavering wisdom. The community of Prosperity endured not just as a place on a map, but as an idea that true strength comes from humility. And the most enduring legacy is built not against nature, but in partnership with it. The entrance to the first underground home on Miller's Ridge is now a protected historic site for the town's residents. 50 years after her death, a bronze plaque was attached next to the sturdy oak door, reading Ada Thornton, 1851 to 1929. People called it insanity. She demonstrated it was wisdom. When pride collapsed and society failed, she heeded the voice of Mother Earth and found shelter. From this refuge constructed with intelligence and bravery, she rescued 27 people and ensured the town's future. She taught us that the smartest dwelling is not one that fights nature, but one that welcomes it. Her faithful horse Copper was always with her, the first being saved by this warmth. The tale of Ada Thornton stands as an unforgettable lesson on the remote frontier. It speaks an everlasting truth to those who pay attention. Preparedness is not baseless anxiety. It is the ultimate form of reverence for a world that is more ancient, more powerful, and much less merciful than human arrogance. And occasionally, the person labeled as insane is the sole individual with the vision to rescue everyone.